All right, everybody, it's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcasts. There's a show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards, Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast, in 3 categories: education, storyteller and drama, and arts. For 5 years and with over 280 weekly episodes and 64 million plus downloads, the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast has provided advice and tips from international best-selling authors, world-class artists, contest judges and winners, and industry professionals. It is based on the world-famous Writers of the Future contest created in 1983 by L. Ron Hubbard to help the aspiring writer and artist no matter their age, race, ethnicity, or gender. It is dedicated to the future of storytelling and art by showing that it is never too late to start, and those who make it are those who never give up. We are all busy, but I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment and vote now. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast in any or all 3 of the categories: education, storyteller, drama, or art. News on the flip side. It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcast. There's an amazing show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards, the News on the Flip Side, in the category of politics and news. News on the Flip Side is a much different news and political program, which is not deemed as opinion news. Listen as anchor host Joe Montaldo brings you just the facts from trusted sources, which will allow you, the people, to make up your own minds on the various stories being reported on. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate the News on the Flip Side in the category of news and politics. That's podcastawards.com. Please take a moment and vote now.
Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist, and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. If you've been listening to this podcast or are new to it, I thank you very much. I would also appreciate it if you took a moment to follow it on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. Writers of the Future is one of the longest running writing competitions in the world, now celebrating 4 decades of providing a helping hand as initially conceived by L. Ron Hubbard. I also want to let you know that the Writers of the Future volumes are available in bookstores throughout the US, Canada, the UK, South Africa, and Australia, as well as through all major online retailers. Today is the last day of the Writers of the Future workshop. We had our gala last night, and we just finished our workshop on how to promote yourself. And I've got with us 3 of our winners, and so I'm going to have them introduce themselves with the story that they published in Volume 40, and they'll go in several questions. So beginning with the ladies first.
Hi, I'm Stephannie Tallent, and I always get this mixed up. I always say the Bayou story. So Life and Love and Death in the Bayou story. So
good.
I'm Lance Robinson, and the story I wrote is called 5 Days Until Sunset.
And I'm Tom Vandermolen. My story is Nonzero.
All right. So all amazing stories. And you also had some incredibly amazing art that went with yours. Your artists.
oh my God, my artwork was beyond incredible.
When I saw it, when I first saw it, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
All right. So the people are going to be listening to this podcast. I think one thing they'll really be able to enjoy on listening to what you have to say is your journeys as writers, being able to get from how can I write, wanting to write, writing fan fiction, whatever you started off with, to getting to where you enter the contest and actually winning. And then we'll get into what it was like for the week that was here. So again, starting with yourself, Stephannie, go ahead.
So I had to be careful because I'm obviously getting too excited and enthused.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been writing off and on ever since I was a kid. And I mentioned, when they were asking about our histories and what you guys could say about us, I was like, oh yeah. And I found this kind of hand-bound book that it was part of this summer program or whatever for different ages. And it's so funny because I was already writing mystery, horror, fantasy, even at that age, 9 years old. So yeah. And then off and on, high school, a little bit in college, Yeah, off and on, until probably seriously about 5 years ago was when I really started throwing myself into different workshops and things like that.
Okay, great. And yourself, Lance?
Well, like Stephannie, I've been writing since I was a kid. I wrote poems and stories. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is sort of roughly the Canadian equivalent of PBS in the United States, they had an after-school children's TV program called Pencil Box, and kids could send in stories, and then winners would be picked, and the stories would be dramatized on TV. And so when I was in, I think, grade 6, I had a story appear on CBC television after school.
Wow, how cool is that?
It was fun. It was I was very, very proud of myself when I did that. But I kept writing. I got serious about science fiction and fantasy towards the end of high school. And starting in 1990 and then like into the early 2000s, I had a handful of short story publications in small press magazines. And then life happened, graduate school, kids. I moved to Africa. My life just filled up with other things, and I gradually drifted away from writing. But the itch was still there. And when I moved back to Canada about 3 years ago, I decided it's time to start writing again. And I remembered the Writers of the Future contest, and so I wrote a story and submitted it.
All right. And Tom?
Yeah, kind of the same story as everyone else here. I started when I was in elementary school or middle school. Wrote a few stories, submitted some, even got some nice handwritten rejections, which were actually I treasured quite a bit.
Sure.
And then, like everyone else, hit adulthood. You leave college, you work a job. I was in the Navy, so I ended up being deployed all the time, and it got less and less to be a part of my life. And it wasn't until I retired in 2012 that I really started thinking about getting back into this and trying to make it a focus of my life again. And I wrote a story and then was trying to think about where to shop it around, then saw that Writers of the Future was still going strong. So I said, hey, might as well give it a shot again.
Good. So now we've got 2 military, and I always love it when we get military winners, because we do a lot just from what we do as a publisher. And because we're the host of the Hollywood Christmas Parade, we do a lot with the military there. We're the kickoff event for the U.S. Marine Corps Toys for Tots. Emily and I were both honorary commanders of the Air Force, which then converted to Space Force. We would go to various events at the LA Air Force Base, and which now is Space Force there. And our keynote speaker 2 years ago, General Thompson, is one of the creators of Space Force. He just retired, and so we could get him as a speaker then after he retired. But that was so much fun. It was just like getting on these briefings, and General Raymond, who's the Joint Chiefs of Staff, coming in briefings with them. They had these Zooms when everything was shut down. It was like, can we be listening to this? It was way cool. So what we do though with the parade though is we try to celebrate the military as much as possible as well. So when we get military winners, we definitely have to celebrate so that other people in the military can also know that they can take your creativity and drop it in and submit, whether it's in art or storytelling, to submit it. And I work with one writer named James Rassone. He writes near feature science fiction. He's career Army. He's multiple services, but he was like 25 years. And he was a lot of stuff. And he was an interrogator in Iraq. And it was pretty traumatizing. In that one movie that came out a few years ago with the translators in the Middle East, and the one guy says, I need to get him out. I promised him and I'm going to get him out. I forget the name of the movie. It was very touching. And he said, yeah, it was really bad because so many translators were not gotten their citizenship. It wasn't like they were promised. It wasn't done. And then the Taliban just went and systematically hunted them, killed them and their families, So that was pretty amazing. But he said, yeah, that's for real, that type of stuff, And so for him, it was a lot of therapy as well, being able to write these stories. Near feature science fiction, which just scares the bejesus out of me, because you can't really tell where the science fiction ends and the real life begins. But anyway, I guess the first thing is this week, the week-long workshop, it was, I don't even know if I can say what's been the best part, but what part stands out right now? Because it's going to change over time as things settle and you're able to distill things and all of a sudden sort stuff. So what's been like the highlight for yourself, Stephannie, for this week?
I mean, honestly, I think the thing that was the most kind of emotionally impactful was seeing the art. I was just blown away by that. And that I don't want to lessen all the, the importance of meeting all the wonderful instructors and how much we could learn from them and everything. But that piece of art was the first time anybody's created something for something I created. And that was, I still can't really, put it into words well enough. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. That's not an uncommon answer, what you just said. Okay. And what about yourself, Lance?
I mean, the art also, the piece that was done for my story, just it blew me away slowly. It wasn't like see it and wow. It was like see it and seep into my heart and just wow. That was the feeling I had with the art. But I don't. To me, what has really stood out, what's in my mind right now, is all the practical business side of the work that we had, especially over the past few days. So many practical little tips that I didn't know about, and I think it's going to be